The biggest shakeup to the federal workforce in nearly a century just happened. And it's driven by one core belief.
Mm-hmm.
A smaller government is a better government. Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today, well, it's to really dig into the source material covering these huge recent reductions across the U.S. federal workforce.
Yeah, these aren't just, typical layoffs.
Exactly. These are historic cuts. They're being spearheaded by this new Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, they're calling it,
Yeah.
and it aligns almost perfectly with long-standing conservative ideas like you see in Project 2025.
Right.
So we're diving deep. We want to uncover the sheer scale, the financial thinking behind it, and the, frankly, aggressive legal tactics used to shrink Washington down. You're about to get the full picture.
And the scale, that's what really hits you first. It's historic, and it happened fast.
How fast are we talking?
Well, the administration announced plans targeting around 300,000 federal civil service jobs. Almost all of that was pinned on DOGE. But here's the kicker. By late August 2025, that's just 8 months into the new term, just under 200,000 federal workers were already gone off the payroll.
Wow, 200,000 in 8 months.
Yeah. And, for context, the U.S. has about 2.4 million civilian federal workers. So this reduction, nearly 200,000 people, that's hitting about 12% of the entire workforce.
Full percent?
It's not just like trimming around the edges. This is a fundamental structural change, top to bottom, designed to really shrink the federal government's footprint for good.
And the why behind it, the rationale, seems clearly rooted in the economics.
Right.
Especially the arguments from groups pushing for limited government. Why now?
Well, the argument was that the sheer size had become unsustainable.
And the sources, they point to a couple of really big numbers driving that feeling.
They do.
First, federal civilian employment. It ballooned by 27% over the previous 25 years.
A huge jump.
And second, federal spending hit, $6.75 trillion in fiscal year 2024?
Staggering.
So for the administration and groups supporting this, that massive bureaucracy just looked way too bloated, way too expensive. It created this mandate, didn't it, for immediate, really dramatic cuts.
That fiscal narrative, that's absolutely the engine here. If you start from the premise that government waste is the core problem, then tackling the workforce cost, well, that becomes job number one.
Okay, let's unpack that cost side a bit more then, because the justification really leans hard on this idea that federal employees make way more than private sector folks. The sources show a pretty big gap.
A very big gap.
So looking at the 2023 numbers, the average federal civilian worker, this includes wages and benefits, made $157,000.
Right.
Now compare that to the average U.S. private sector compensation. That was $94,000.
Huge difference.
That's not small. It means the average federal employee costs the taxpayer almost 67% more than someone doing a similar job in the private sector.
And that 67% premium, that figure became the administration's most powerful financial argument for these cuts. And it wasn't just salary. The source materials really highlight this. Federal benefits costs alone were estimated to be about 47% higher for federal civilian employees compared to similar private sector workers.
47% just on benefits.
Just on benefits.
Yeah.
So when groups like, say, the Cato Institute looked at this, they figured cutting federal employment by just 10% could save taxpayers something like $40 billion a year.
$40 billion.
Yeah.
Annually.
Yeah. And that provided this, immediate concrete financial case that the bureaucracy had sort of become this elite island, as one source put it, of highly paid workers kind of disconnected from market realities.
So you've got this workforce that's way more expensive, but the sources also suggest they were, less accountable. How did that cost issue connect with the perceived lack of performance requirements?
Well, it created this operational paradox, right? The data showed the federal layoff and discharge rate was only about 1/3 of what you see in the private sector.
1/3.
Yeah. The old merit system, which, was designed to protect workers from political games, it also made it nearly impossible for managers to actually deal with poor performance. Trying to get rid of a federal employee, unless it was for something really extreme, it was apparently a nightmare. The process often took, believe it or not, 1.5 years on average.
Year and a half.
Yeah, hearings, appeals. It was so difficult administratively that managers they rarely even tried unless it was really bad misconduct. So the system guaranteed job security, sure, but it also bred a lot of inefficiency, according to these sources.
Which is why this policy change, the quick rollout of this schedule policy career idea, or Schedule F as it was known before, why it's so fundamental. Can we zoom in there? What does stripping those protections actually mean for a career civil servant on the ground?
It means moving the government away from that, post-Watergate, nonpartisan system
Hmm.
towards one really focused on political alignment with the administration. An executive order came down that basically stripped legal protections from political firings for potentially thousands of federal employees, specifically those in policy-related jobs.
So jobs that influence policy, but held by career people, not political
Yeah,
appointees.
exactly. Those people, instead of being shielded by the old merit system, they could now essentially be hired and fired based more on whether they align ideologically with the White House's goals.
Right. The principle being that federal workers have to implement official policy, period, regardless of personal views. And if they're seen as, dragging their feet or obstructing the administration's agenda.
They can be replaced easily by people seen as more loyal to the administration's goals.
Okay.
It's really the biggest single mechanism they designed to impose political accountability on that career bureaucracy, to make sure that if the executive branch sets a direction, the staff can't just slow walk it or undermine it behind the scenes.
That definitely sets the stage for the huge rapid turnover we saw. But what's fascinating looking at the sources is how they did it. This aggressive, multi-layered strategy to get over 200,000 people out so quickly. It wasn't just one announcement, was it?
No, not at all. It was a campaign, really, in layers. We saw basically 3 overlapping stages of reduction.
Okay, what were they?
First was something called the Deferred Resignation Program. This was an early, technically voluntary deal offered right away, like January 28th, 2025.
And people took it.
Oh, yeah. About 75,000 federal workers snapped that up pretty quickly.
Wait, 75,000 accepted almost immediately? Was that really voluntary, or did the sources suggest maybe they felt pressured, saw the writing on the wall?
The sources definitely leaned towards the latter. While it was presented as voluntary, these were often experienced senior people.
Right.
They likely understood the new administration saw their roles as either redundant or, frankly, maybe opposed to its goals. Taking an early package was just a practical way to avoid getting targeted later. It cleared the decks fast.
Okay, so that's stage one. What was next?
Stage 2 involved more targeted firings. A directive went out to dismiss probationary employees.
Those are the newer hires, right? Less than a year or recently promoted.
Exactly. And agencies were often told they could cite inadequate performance without needing a mountain of evidence. It was kind of a low-hanging fruit approach to get numbers down quickly and, importantly, send a message about new performance expectations.
Got it. And the third stage? That sounds like the big one for long-term change. The mass reductions in force, or RIFs.
That's the one. The Office of Management and Budget ordered agencies to draw up RIF plans to slash their workforces.
And they focus specifically on jobs that aren't required by law, right? I saw a number of like 700,000 jobs fall into that category.
That's the potential pool, yeah. And RIF, this is crucial. It isn't just a layoff. It's a specific administrative process designed to permanently eliminate the position itself.
Ah, so it's much harder for a future administration to just hire someone back into that same slot.
Precisely. It shows a clear intent to permanently downsize the federal government.
And looking at where the axe fell, DOGE clearly had specific targets, didn't they?
Yeah.
Agencies linked to regulatory power or seen as symbols of government bloat.
Absolutely. The cuts were broad, but very intentional. The Department of Defense lost 55,000 employees. That reflects a push to cut military bureaucracy.
Oh, yeah.
The Treasury Department saw over 30,000 cuts, and that was overwhelmingly focused on the IRS, which, let's be honest, was a major political target.
No surprise there.
Right. Department of Agriculture lost over 21,000. And then you had regulatory agencies like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, and USAI. They were targeted for basically outright elimination.
Wow. So this restructuring, it wasn't just about payroll or efficiency numbers. It was also a direct hit on the power of federal employee unions, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Conservatives often point to them as part of the problem with inefficiency and firing issues.
Oh, absolutely. That union crackdown was a core element of the whole strategy. Executive orders came out fast, and they effectively outlawed most of the government's collective bargaining authority. That impacted over 1 million federal workers.
1 million workers lost collective bargaining.
The majority of it, yeah. And the administration also adopted specific recommendations to really hit the union's power structure.
Like what?
Like restricting the use of official time, that's paid time for union business, limiting it to less than 25% of an employee's time, basically forcing them to spend more time on their actual government jobs.
Okay.
And they started charging unions rent for using federal office space. These weren't random moves. They were strategically aimed at weakening the structures that, from the administration's view, protected the bureaucracy from political accountability.
Okay, so this is where the immediate cuts start merging with that bigger long-term conservative vision, right?
Mm-hmm.
The workforce reductions were kind of clearing the ground for privatization, shifting government functions over to the private sector.
Exactly. That privatization push, it had strong backing. Figures like Elon Musk were consistently advocating for more automation, more outsourcing.
And didn't Brookings mention this?
Yeah, the Brookings Institution, even analyzing it from maybe a different perspective, noted that the firings clearly set the stage for more privatization down the line.
And groups like Cato were pushing specific ideas too, weren't they?
Right. Cater recommended privatizing big federal entities, the U.S. Postal Service, Amtrak, even the air traffic control system, things conservatives have talked about for years.
And we saw actual examples of this happening quickly.
We did. A really clear example was at NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
What happened there?
Well, new appointees with known financial ties to private weather companies were put in charge, and they immediately started pushing to privatize federal weather forecasting functions.
Arguing the government shouldn't compete with private companies.
Precisely. Arguing the government was inefficiently duplicating services that the private market already offered or could offer better. The core argument behind all of this is that the private sector, with competition and innovation, can just deliver these services more efficiently and cheaper than a government monopoly.
But making changes this huge, affecting hundreds of thousands of lives, it must have faced massive legal challenges immediately. What happened in the courts, especially around the president's power to do this.
Yeah, the legal battles were intense, and this might be the most monumental part of the whole story, legally speaking. The Supreme Court ultimately became the key player, and they sided with expanding executive power.
How did that play out? Weren't there initial court rulings against the firings?
There were. Lower courts initially jumped in. They issued injunctions, ruled many of the firings illegal, including for probationary employees, and even some inspectors general based on decades of civil service precedent.
But those rulings didn't hold.
No. The Supreme Court stepped in and repeatedly overrode those lower court orders. They allowed the workforce reductions to keep going.
And the significance of that.
It's huge. The sources indicate this signals a real shift, a willingness by the Supreme Court to potentially overturn long-standing precedents that used to shield independent agencies from direct political pressure.
So it basically gives the president more power over the bureaucracy.
A lot more power. It dramatically expands the executive branch's ability to use the threat of layoffs or policy realignment through things like Schedule F to pressure federal workers into aligning with the administration's agenda. It really sets the stage for potentially a much leaner, more politically responsive government going forward.
So let's bring it all together. What's the big picture takeaway here, especially for you listening?
In simple terms, the administration pulled off a massive government restructuring. They faced huge opposition politically and legally, but they succeeded. They got significant cost cuts. They managed to impose more political accountability on how policy gets executed, and they pushed forward those long-term privatization goals. And crucially, they did it by wielding new legal authority confirmed by the highest court. This really feels like a new era, where the executive branch has shown it has both the will and the legal muscle to dramatically shrink the federal government.
Right, and that's the key takeaway, isn't it?
Yeah.
This overhaul wasn't just about saving dollars and cents, though that was a huge part of the argument. It reinforces that central conservative principle driving the whole thing. The goal is a limited government, one strictly tied to its constitutional powers.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental shift away from that big government model. The argument here is that real growth, real efficiency in America, that has to come from the private sector, not from what they see as a bloated, unaccountable bureaucracy. So here's a final thought to chew on. If reducing the federal workforce by nearly 200,000 people actually resulted in, minimal disruption to essential government services, and the sources suggest things kept running relatively smoothly,
Right.
then we have to ask, how much more efficiency, how much more economic growth could the American private sector achieve with all those resources and all those experienced workers redirected its way? Something to think about as this dramatic new chapter in American governance keeps unfolding.